2 Chronicles, chapters 25 to 27. Amaziah became king when he was 25 years old, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jehoadan. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, but not wholeheartedly. As soon as the kingdom was firmly in his grasp, he executed his servants who had killed his father, the king. However, he did not put their children to death, because as it is written in the law, in the book of Moses, where the Lord commanded, fathers are not to die because of children, and children are not to die because of fathers, but each one will die for his own sin. Then Amaziah gathered Judah and assembled them according to ancestral families, according to commanders of thousands, and according to commanders of hundreds. He numbered those 20 years old or more. For all Judah and Benjamin, he found there to be 300,000 fit young men who could serve in the army, bearing spear and shield. Then, for 7,500 pounds of silver, he hired 100,000 valiant warriors from Israel. However, a man of God came to him and said, "King, do not let Israel's army go with you, for the Lord is not with Israel. All the Ephraim is not with Israel, all the Ephraimites. But if you go with them, do it. Be strong for battle. But God will make you stumble before the enemy, for God has the power to help or to make one stumble." Then Amaziah said to the man of God, "What should I do about the 7,500 pounds of silver I gave to Israel's division?" The man of God replied, "The Lord is able to give you much more than this." So Amaziah released the division that came to him from Ephraim to go home, but they got very angry with Judah and returned home in a fierce rage. Amaziah strengthened his position and led his people to the Salt Valley. He struck down 10,000 Seirites, and the Judites captured 10,000 alive. They took them to the top of a cliff, where they threw them off, and all of them were dashed to pieces. As for the men of the division that Amaziah sent back, so they could not go with him into battle, they raided the cities of Judah and Samaria to Beth Horon, struck down 3,000 of their people, and took a great deal of plunder. After Amaziah came from the attack on the Edomites, he brought the gods of the Seirites and set them up as his gods. He worshipped before them and burned incense to them. So the Lord's anger was against Amaziah. And he sent a prophet to him who said, "Why have you sought a people's gods that should not rescue their own people from you?" This is what happens when you don't give yourself wholeheartedly to God. You're there for a season. You come to him for a season to get what you could gain. But since your heart's not there, you end up falling away again. While he was still speaking to him, the king asked, "Have we made you the king's counselor? Stop. Why should you lose your life?" So the prophet stopped, but he said, "I know that God intends to destroy you, because you have done this and have not listened to my advice." King Amaziah of Judah took counsel. Why is the prophet saying that? Why is the prophet saying that I know that God intends to destroy you because you have done this and have not listened to my advice? Because prophets are here to speak for God. They are the mouthpiece of God. When they're speaking to you, you're supposed to receive it as God speaking to you. And when you do not listen to God and you reject him, it leads to death. King Amaziah of Judah took counsel and sent word to Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, king of Israel, and challenged him, "Come, let's meet face to face." King Jehoash of Israel sent word to King Amaziah of Judah, saying, "The thistle in Lebanon sent a message to the cedar in Lebanon, saying, "Give your daughter to my son as a wife." Then a wild animal in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thistle. You have said, "Look, I have defeated Edom," and you have become overconfident that you will get glory. Now stay at home. Why stir up such trouble so that you fall, and Judah with you? But Amaziah should not listen, for this turn of events was from God in order to hand them over to their enemies, because they went after the gods of Edom. So King Jehoash of Israel advanced. He and King Amaziah of Judah met face to face at Bethshemesh, that belonged to Judah. Judah was routed before Israel, and each man fled to his own tent. King Jehoash of Israel captured Judah's king Amaziah, son of Joash, son of Jehoahaz, at Bethshemesh. Then Jehoash took him to Jerusalem and broke down 200 yards of Jerusalem's wall from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate. He took all the gold, silver, all the utensils that were found with Obed-Edom in God's temple, the treasures of the king's palace, and the hostages. Then he returned to Samaria. Judah's king, Amaziah, son of Joash, lived 15 years after the death of Israel's king Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz. The rest of the events of Amaziah's reign, from beginning to end, are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. From the time Amaziah turned from following the Lord, a conspiracy was formed against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. However, men were sent after him to Lachish, and they put him to death there. They carried him back on horses and buried him with his ancestors in the city of Judah. All the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in place of his father Amaziah. After Amaziah, the king rested with his ancestors. Uzziah rebuilt Eloth and restored it to Judah. Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jecholiah. She was from Jerusalem. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his father Amaziah had done. He sought God throughout the lifetime of Zechariah, the teacher of the fear of God. During the time that he sought the Lord, God gave him success. Uzziah went out to wage war against the Philistines, and he tore down the wall of Gath, the wall of Jabneh, and the wall of Ashdod. Then he built cities in the vicinity of Ashdod and among the Philistines. God helped him against the Philistines, the Arabs that live in Gerbaal, and the Meunites. The Ammonites paid tribute to Uzziah, and his fame spread as far as the entrance of Egypt, for God made him very powerful. Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate, the valley gate, and the corner buttress, and he fortified them. Since he had many cattle both in the Judean foothills and the plain, he built towers in the desert and dug many wells. And since he was a lover of the soil, he had farmers and vine dressers in the hills and in the fertile lands. Uzziah had an army equipped for combat that went out to war by division according to their assessments, as recorded by Jael, the court secretary, and Maaseiah, the officer, under the authority of Hananiah, one of the king's commanders. The total number of family heads was 2,600 valiant warriors. Under their authority was an army of 307,500 equipped for combat, a powerful force to help the king against the enemy. Uzziah provided the entire army with shields, spears, helmets, armor, bows, and sling stones. He made skillfully designed devices in Jerusalem to shoot arrows and catapult large stones for use on the towers and on the corners. So his fame spread even to distant places, for he was wondrously helped until he became strong. But when he became strong, he grew arrogant, and it led to his own destruction. Pride comes before the fall. He acted unfaithfully against the Lord his God by going into the Lord's sanctuary to burn incense on the incense altar. The priest Azariah, along with 80 brave priests of the Lord, went in after him. I believe this is why the Lord allows Christians to continue to fall in sin every once in a while, because this arrogance that came from pride is the same thing that caused Satan to fall, being the favorite angel of the Lord, the most beautiful of all the other angels. And it made him arrogant. It gave him pride, and he rebelled, and it caused the fall. The priest Azariah, along with 80 brave priests of the Lord, went in after him. They took their stand against King Uzziah and said, "Uzziah, you have no right to offer incense to the Lord. Only the consecrated priests, the descendants of Aaron, have the right to offer incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have acted unfaithfully. You will not receive honor from the Lord God." Uzziah, with a fire pan in his hand to offer incense, was enraged. But when he became enraged with the priests, in the presence of the priests in the Lord's temple, beside the altar of incense, a skin disease broke out on his forehead. Then Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests turned to him and saw that he was diseased on his forehead. They rushed him out of there. He himself also hurried to get out, because the Lord had afflicted him. So King Uzziah was diseased to the time of his death. He lived in quarantine with a serious skin disease, and was excluded from access to the Lord's temple, while his son Jotham was over the king's household, governing the people of the land. Now the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, wrote about the rest of the events of Uzziah's reign from beginning to end. Uzziah rested with his ancestors, and he was buried with his ancestors in the burial ground of the king's cemetery. For they said, "He has a skin disease." His son Jotham became king in his place. Jotham was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his father Uzziah had done. In addition, he didn't enter the Lord's sanctuary, but the people still behaved corruptly. Jotham built the upper gate of the Lord's temple, and he built extensively on the wall of Ophel. He also built cities in the hill country of Judah, and fortresses and towers in the forests. He waged war against the king of the Ammonites. He overpowered the Ammonites, and that year they gave him 7,500 pounds of silver, 60,000 bushels of wheat, and 60,000 bushels of barley. They paid him the same in the second and third years. So Jotham strengthened his position, because he did not waver in obeying the Lord his God. As for the rest of the events of Jotham's reign, along with all his wars and his ways, note that they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. Jotham rested with his ancestors, and was buried in the city of David. His son Ahaz became king in his place.